David, we're back for another episode of Discovery CSI. How are you today, David?
I'm very well. I'm very excited. This is a pivotal moment, I think, in America's history.
That it is. I think people were pleased, David, to see you yesterday on the walk around New York. We were talking a bit about social engineering and how some of these covert attacks have been geared towards you and me. It's amazing how relentless they are. But I think this is a crucial week, David. We've seen a lot of voices removed from the internet, and some of these social engineering attacks may be quite indirect, but definitely eliminating crowdsource the truth as a source of information for people who realize that the mainstream news is being used to socially engineer the public. By taking us off the internet and reducing our reach. This is what social engineers want to do, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. And our antagonist or opponent, if you will, is the world's largest broadcaster with an audience of 500 million people in 50 languages, which is obviously the BBC, which has been injecting news into this election. And I don't think Americans understand the extent to which the BBC is manipulating perceptions about the election. Over to you.
Well, manipulating perception is what it's all about. And, yesterday when you and I brought some ground truth to some of the things that Bishop Gators has misled both of us and our audience about, there was an alarming backlash from the social engineers. People can see that video on Crowdsource the Truth too. People can also watch us on Band.video, which is InfoWars channel. I have to tell you, David, there's been a remarkable response to this expose where we revealed Larry Gators is not in fact a bishop, at least not by the biblical requirements, as I'm told. A bishop needs to be married, which Larry Gators is not. But he's also just lied to both of us. He's deceived us. And I believe he was intending to drop information on Crowdsource the Truth that could later be used by other social engineers to strike the channel, remove me from the internet, and prevent us from letting people know about our sponsor exclusive shows, David. The next one is going to start in less than an hour on subscribestar.com/reversecsi, patreon.com/reversecsi storyboards, and subscribestar.com and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. But I don't want to waste people's time with social engineers like Larry Gators. People can check out that video and learn more. What we want to talk about today, David, is the former mayor of San Francisco, Willie Brown, receiving what was referred to as a low-key warning on 9/11. And you may have observed, David, you and I have done a lot of talking about warnings. We were met by an individual on the streets there in Vancouver, British Columbia, when I came to visit you last year or the year before, about this First Nations mural that's painted on 425 Carroll Street. Without hesitation, that individual told us it was a warning. So in my opinion, David, irrespective of how that design came to be printed on the building, someone who commissioned it or allowed it or whatever wanted that warning there.
Yeah, and I think that's a warning to the downtown East Side community to keep their mouths shut during a period when, unbelievably, I think the so-called Vancouver model for money laundering and organized crime took off. And I think this was around 1996. What was happening in Vancouver? It's a disgrace to the police, the welfare agency, et cetera, because it would appear they were setting up an operation to trade in hardcore adult and child pornography and online gaming in 60 countries. And this to me is the basis of the term that I keep using, an online criminal insurgency, because can you imagine how many people would have fallen into that trap and be subsequently recorded on film and subsequently blackmailed and extorted?
But let me interject for a second, David, because I think for some viewers it's a bit of a stretch of the mind to imagine someone being entrapped in the way that you describe. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that they're videotaped doing this or that. Even in Operation Or, we heard that people's credit cards were stolen, and the mere accusation that they had been involved in this sort of stuff presented along with, I guess it's called evidence, but this credit card evidence that leads the charge to the individual resulted in 33 people committing suicide. So it isn't necessarily, when we talk a lot about lawfare and these tactics of social engineers, they aren't necessarily about proving anything. They're more about alleging things and manipulating evidence to cause the public to believe something. It doesn't matter if a newspaper article comes out that says so-and-so is accused of child pornography, their credit card was found in a list of people buying it, this information was found on their computer. These are all things that hackers could do to accuse someone, and if it takes 2 or 3 years for that person to go through court and prove that they didn't do it, maybe they come out on the other end without going to jail, but meanwhile, all their money has been drained and they're broke and their public reputation is destroyed in the newspaper. It's easy for them to do.
Right. And so if we look at this outfit, SERCO, in respect of that, SERCO worked with the National Crime Agency in the United Kingdom and Images Technologies in Vancouver on pedophile or alleged pedophile tracking. And they created a vast global organization with frequent arrests and people ultimately challenged by having to prove they didn't do something. And like you said, in the particular case of Operation Ore, 33 suicides. So the fact that SERCO can inject a fake theory or a fake allegation and frame someone, basically they can destroy their lives. And of course, realistically, that can be pointed at any particular target. And of course, the high value target for these people are, well, let's say potentially the mayor of San Francisco, the judicial system in Vancouver, or people in New York and Washington. And I'm very intrigued by who sent that low-key early warning. And
well, we've got someone in the comments telling us that it was National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice. This is Frankly Speaking saying that. And I've asked him, it was common news at the time, all over web news sites. Now everything is scrubbed. That's quite interesting because I was not able to find Condoleezza Rice's name, but I do remember hearing about this at the time. So Condoleezza Rice, David, how does that change your assessment of this Willie Brown low-key early warning about air travel if it was in fact Condoleezza Rice who told him?
Well, if it was in fact Condoleezza Rice, that would be interesting, but that is a hypothesis, right? The one that intrigues me more are the people who actually are in the business of air traffic control. So on 911, SERCO, the British company, is, and a lot of Americans don't understand that, the largest non-state air traffic controller in the world, with 58 or 60 FAA contract towers in Western United States, including in California. That means to say the people who would have been in a position to monitor the movements of various planes, including planes that appear to have been hijacked electronically, was SERCO. So why wouldn't the warning have come from SERCO? Because something was going on in New York that SERCO was highly involved in, right? In the North Tower, right? If you look at that collage you put together, the second plane is allegedly moving towards the South Tower, but the first tower has been hit. And very interestingly, it was hit, I think, around the 88th floor, 40 floors below, Jason. SERCO was holding a meeting of shareholders. And the one and only state amongst the shareholders of SERCO is California. Now, it is alleged that Willie Brown was going to New York to attend a board meeting of the California Retirement Fund. And I have reason to believe that the California Retirement Fund, or CalPERS, California Public Employees Retirement System, had actually got tricked into participating in that shareholders meeting on the 47th floor with SERCO, with some rather dodgy, there we are, the state retirement system.
But wait, so you're saying Willie Brown was going to be at the meeting? He was arriving too late.
Yes, he would have arriving too late, but the people who planned the meeting knew there was going to be an aftermath where they presumably or potentially felt that Willie Brown would be a very useful asset to have in New York in the aftermath of the devastation of the attack. So I don't say that he was necessarily going to try and get to the meeting. Like you said, he would have been late. But had that attack on New York succeeded in the way that I think it was planned, that second plane, right, that you show in your collage, it left 16 minutes late. So air traffic controllers like SERCO, perhaps they planned that the second plane would hit the south face of the South Tower at the same time as the north face of the North Tower was hit. Now, imagine the shock and awe impact on the United States. I mean, people's minds would literally have gone numb. As it was bad enough, because that second plane hit the south face of the South Tower at 2 minutes past 9, 16 minutes later. So I think that warning came through the SERCO compromised node network, which we can go through because there are several very important but apparently independent compromised nodes controlled by SERCO out of London. Over to you.
Well, the other thing we want to talk about, and this is bad on me because I've already forgotten the guy's name, but there is someone else here featured in the
Terence
collage.
Hallinan.
Right. Remind us what this guy's all about.
Okay, Terence Hallinan was frequently jailed as part of the progressive protest movement, but he did some very interesting things. He went to the London School of Economics, which, as you know, is the center of Fabianism and creeping socialism. Basically, the intellectuals back at the turn of the 19th century figured that instead of having a revolution, all you needed to do was incrementally get the public more and more dependent on welfare and handouts. And ultimately, you will end up with a socialist states around the world and a global form of control. So Hallinan was frequently arrested, but very interestingly, he goes to the London School of Economics. He comes back and he apparently fast tracks Kamala Harris as a prosecutor in the 1990s.
Well, but wait a minute, aren't we skipping a lot of his? So he was a progressive protester. He's shown here in an Intercept article. Terence Hallinan confronts the police. He claims beat his head open while he was trying to help a girl to safety away from the police during a sit-in at San Francisco State College in California on May 22nd, 1968. Now, I mean, if this were in color and the clothing and hairstyles were slightly different, this might look like a photograph from last night. We see a lot of lawyers hanging out with the police, claiming that the police are attacking these crowds. I think a strong argument could be made that the existence of these crowds is intimidating the citizens of the United States and preventing normal commerce and activity, and that when the police tell them to disperse and they don't disperse, they're subject to arrest. So if they get beaten, I don't know.
Well, now let's just look. Apparently, he was a very good boxer, but he hit and punched up and basically bullied and thugged his way through to the final position where he gets to fast track Kamala Harris as a prosecutor, but with a deep and profound knowledge of what I would describe as a privatized and politicized jail system, where some very dangerous people are moving through the jail system under the three strikes laws, which was sponsored to a very large extent by Bill Clinton and Kamala Harris. Now, one might argue, why are they so keen on putting people, let's say, for relatively minor offenses into jail for life? Well, I think what you were getting with Kamala Harris and Bill Clinton was a three strikes program where you could build a body of radicalized prisoners within the jail system and offer them, provided the certain kinds of strikes they had undergone or undertaken in the jail system, they could be released from jail for 36 or 48 hours to do the dirty deed and then be back in jail as a kind of storage facility until the next attack. And you've got in the United States, I notice, a kind of what I call an online criminal insurgency of Black Lives Matter and Antifa, who are actually going around wrecking various cities and building a fundamental wall of mistrust between the public and the police, including disarming or defunding the police. Over to you.
Well, it's a common tactic, I think, to undermine local law enforcement while you attack the economy. So many people around have lost their businesses. Obviously, when they have this kind of financial turmoil, it can result in a lot of distress in their personal relationships. So marriages are ending, people are left alone, they're maybe losing their homes, they become hungry and more dependent on government and things like that for handouts or whatever. There's a lot of articles when we hear about Terrence Hallinan. First of all, we should also mention that, you did mention, but I want to emphasize for people, Hallinan was the district attorney of San Francisco, and he's there agitating in 1968 against the police, probably would have been an ally of the Weather Underground. Now we've got Chesa Boudin as the district attorney in San Francisco, literally the child of two Weather Underground members, raised by his adoptive parents, the leaders of the Weather Underground. And so we've got this thread of Weather Underground district attorneys in San Francisco. I don't know if a lot of people really recall. I mean, Kamala Harris is known right now as a senator and a vice presidential candidate after Nancy Pelosi's announcement this morning. Some people feel she's even the presumptive, vice presidential, coming vice president. But is there a thing going on, David, where somebody keeps installing Weather Underground district attorneys in San Francisco? And what's the strategic value of that if that's what they're doing?
Well, I think the Weather Underground perfected various prison-based techniques of undermining society in the United States and to a certain extent around the world. So it is said that Bernardine Dawn, right, probably the more dangerous and more powerful leader of the Weather Underground as compared with Bill Ayers, they frequently entertained Barack Hussein Obama at their home in Chicago. And I would describe Bernardine Dawn as the handler, or potentially the handler of Barack Obama, as he ran through his career and ultimately ended up in the White House. So there's certain organizations around the world, and I think Cameron Ortis, the RCMP guy who's under arrest right now, he nailed it with his thesis because he talked about the use of compromised nodes by East Asian crime organizations to control the society and basically become a threat to the sovereign state. This woman, right, remember she lectured at the Northwestern University on torture, paradigms, and practice, right? So she has a very profound level of understanding about the use of torture to modify people's perceptions and behavior and basically propagate fear through the electorate. So right now, the United States is considering moving this woman, who's not the nice, friendly lawyer who's looking after the citizens' interests, Kamala Harris. She's potentially a president of the United States if Biden should pass away or have an accident or whatever, if he gets elected as president, and she would become the 47th president of the United States with no, or as far as I'm concerned, as a friend, I think, of the United States, with no due diligence as to whether she should even be considered as eligible to get into the White House and become the most powerful woman in the world. And I believe Terrence Hallinan, if you look at his background, and I think he founded the W.E.B. Du Bois Club or organized it in San Francisco as for the United States Communist Party.
Now, wait, let's stop there for a second, because it does say back in San Francisco, Hallinan helped organize the W.E.B. Du Bois Club to support Communist Party USA. Now, do you know where I first heard about W.E.B. Du Bois?
Yeah, from the bishop.
Right. So it seems to me, David, that a common practice is, and look at that, Webb. When I think about these people, these social engineers that have attempted to attack and undermine, crowdsource the truth, first of all, they've done it using the double cross technique that you've described. They don't come at me head on saying I'm your enemy trying to destroy me. They try to infiltrate as friends to gain our trust by sharing a certain amount of information. And if I'm correct, it seems that when we're talking about Imran Awan, George Webb, seemed to be very close to that story in terms of trying to solve it, but yet any time that I presented actual evidence or directly confronted Imran Awan, George Webb was nowhere to be seen. In fact, he worked against those efforts. Likewise, is it possible that in the case of the bishop, sorry, let me call him what he is, Larry, the fake bishop, Mr. Gators, since he's telling us about the boule, is it possible that he's very close to that and he's a limited hangout and that he's talking about it so that the uninitiated would presume, well, this guy can't possibly be part of it. He's revealing it. He's actually just telling us stuff that's widely known already. We haven't found it, however.
Well, this is the classic example of the limited hangout, right? So again, you introduced the term the double cross operation, which dates back to World War II. Americans should understand that the double cross operations in World War II were operated in a partnership or a joint venture between the BBC and Radio Corporation of America's daughter company, or wholly owned company in the United Kingdom called RCAGB 1929. Well, guess what RCAGB 1929 is called today?
SERCO.
Right. So SERCO and the BBC have been doing exactly what the RCA and the BBC did back in World War II, planting agents, through these compromised node networks who are held together by some form of bond or threat of blackmail that might, for example, be including child abuse. So, yeah, I'm glad you put the Cameron Ortis PhD up. Bowing to Quirinus, we've established that Quirinus is a god of authority, a Roman cult god, early in the foundation of ancient Rome, compromised nodes and cybersecurity in East Asia. So this is 2006, and Cameron Ortis is, I believe, and I've just got a theory that popped into my head this morning, Cameron Ortis may have been working for the RCMP on investigating these compromised node networks. He'd found out something that exposed a classic compromised node, which is two alumni from UBC, that is Justin Trudeau and Christopher Charles Ingvaldson, who would appear to have formed a compromised node around the 1997-1988 period in Vancouver, because Christopher Charles Ingvaldson, Trudeau's roommate, has been charged, arrested, and jailed for directing an international pedophile ring. So I think there's just a possibility that Cameron Ortis had discovered this. Now his problem is he's trapped inside a compromised node, and so they arrest him to neutralize the risk to exposing the compromised node set up by SERCO and protect this criminal, what I would call an online criminal organization. Over to you.
Yeah. Well, it seems that the compromised node, they're trying to compromise people. And if they can't do it through coercion, they do it by making things up. And that does seem to be a big part of what they're doing. So a lot of people are talking about the 17th letter of the alphabet because it was really conspicuous how Larry Gators tried to inject that into our conversation in the last show that he did here. But David, that's not anything that you and I have ever really spoken about, other than to say that it itself appears to be like some sort of compromise operation, some sort of sandbox, very similar to Able Danger, where they set this thing up, it starts putting out information that's attractive to certain people, they come to it, and then that thing gets crushed down, whether it's Able Danger or the 17th letter of the alphabet. If they can get everybody around it and then destroy that and make it this kind of taboo thing, like there's so many efforts to try to associate me with that stuff. It's very clear to me that that's what they're doing.
Yeah, so again, there's that conference in UBC, University of British Columbia in 1981, which I attended as a delegate from SERCO, where they talked about tracking characters to understand narratives. I've extended my thinking about that and discovered that actually it's far more valuable, I think, for the American public as you go through this election tussle, if you will, is to, first of all, track the narrative to understand the characters, and then look at the characters to explore the possibility that these characters have handlers. Now, I have a peripheral knowledge of the work that went on in World War II with those double cross operations. But my understanding of the double cross operations is you have a small group of agents with a handler, right? And those agents and the handler are isolated from other agents and handlers. So if one small group of people get exposed, it doesn't take down the whole operation. And
Right.
the British Broadcasting Corporation, together with Radio Corporation of America, GB, got superb at isolating these various groups into different tasks so they wouldn't be aware, the truth could not be rubber hosed out of them.
Well, the compartmentalization you're talking about.
And it's absolutely critical. And they developed these techniques using, I believe, compromised nodes. Now, back in the 50s and 60s, the compromised nodes were run by the Cray twins that were leaders of the London Underground Criminal Organization. And then, amazingly, the Cray twins were sent to jail for life in 1969, and they ran a jail-based protection racket of compromised nodes, I believe, from behind bars, including, for example, providing protection to bodyguards to Frank Sinatra at the 1988 Wimbledon, where basically 19 thugs delegated to Frank Sinatra to provide security. But I can guarantee from the background of the Cray twins, they were both homosexual pedophiles, right? And killers and psychopaths, very dangerous men. They managed to compromise Her Majesty's prison system such that a young man called Brad Lane, who I said was actually murdered, he wasn't, I think. Well, I don't know how he died, but this 14-year-old lad began to hero worship one of the Crays. I think it was Reggie Cray. And you know what, Jason? They allowed the lad to stay overnight in the Cray cell.
It's unbelievable, David.
How sick is that? Now, let's look at the prison system operations in the United States during the 1980s and 1990s. And here I'm going to rig up a name that I think might be the handler for some of the agents in Washington, and that's Christine Marcy, right? Remember, she founded the JPATs just as, look at that. So this is a killer convicted for life imprisonment. The young lad is 14 at the time. Look at that, the middle picture revealed how Reggie
Why
Cray,
would a British kid wear a Yankees jacket?
well, you tell me. I mean, the guy, basically, people don't understand that the Cray twins had extensive contacts with organized crime groups down on the east side. And what's the name of that guy? He was a 91-year-old, basically bruiser, who had
Lee Amides.
No. He was a crook, but he never got arrested, etc. But he was the mentor of the Crays, and he had serial, continuous contact with the crime families along the East Coast. So there was a nexus, maybe that's a good word that Cameron Ortis used, where SERCO got the contract to move these prisoners around, introduced electronic tagging, the ankle bracelet, which Meng Wanzhou is carrying at the moment. And SERCO appears to have developed tracking facilities, including GPS and face recognition, so it can track voters and victims and pedophiles around the world through compromised nodes and extort them to do exactly what they're told. Over to you.
David, I'm looking at this. This is an article here in the Daily Mail about this kid, Brad Lane. And here they have a photo, the youngster with the great train robber, Buster Edwards, at his flower stall in Waterloo train station. Now, what is this 14-year-old kid doing fascinating himself with these much older criminals? David, it's almost suggestive that the child is property of someone being passed around to these criminals.
Yeah, and the mechanism, and let me come back, and I make no accusations about Kamala Harris, other than the fact that appears to have been put in a position where you could identify children who could be separated from their parents and moved away from the protection of the parents. Sometimes the parents are dead or in jail or whatever, and moved into the community of the United States missing children databases. Right? So I look at Kamala Harris, and she took a job at San Francisco City Hall, running the Family and Children Service Division, representing child abuse and
Didn't
neglect.
Bernadine Dorn do something similar?
Absolutely, right? And so you've got, for example, the Ministry of Children and Families in BC that basically allowed, if that's the right word, the development of a criminal organization called StarNet that you and I have talked about extensively, and you've got the logo up on the collage that you started with. So StarNet was launched in 1996, and I'll come back to a very important meeting in Washington in 1996 that I think explains the John Benet Ramsey murder. So they set up this Operation StarNet to trade in hardcore adult and child pornography and online gaming up to the raid on the 20th of August of 1999, where compromised node networks in the FBI, the CIA, the IRS, the United States Customs, the Vancouver Police, the RCMP, and the high-tech squad from Ottawa raided this place and took away all of the evidence of hardcore adult and child pornography. Isn't that a
But it's
felony?
important. Well, yes, but I think it's also important, David, that, it's interesting because we go over these things so many times and some people say, oh, it's repetitive, but I'm reminded of things as we talk about them. StarNet, that bust, for a long time, the only information that I was seeing about it came from this article here in Newsweek. And I know I've said this before, but I'm not sure if I've said it to you or if I've made this exact connection. Newsweek, we should go back and check. This is from November 6th. Oh, no, sorry, that's today. This is from October 17th, 1999. Mark Hosenball. We should find out more about him. But Newsweek, David, has been owned by Interactive Corporation, which owns the Daily Beast and also owns Vimeo. And the chairman of the Interactive Corporation is Barry Diller. And the Interactive Corporation also purchased StarNet Interactive. Now, we've been unable to definitively determine, perhaps someone in our audience can, we've been unable to determine if StarNet Interactive is in fact related in any way to StarNet Communications, or if this is just a coincidental name. But it certainly is a pretty huge coincidence that this StarNet Interactive is essentially a social media network for tween girls who are kind of 10, 11, 12, 13, in between childhood and teenage years. This Girl Sense website that's controlled by StarNet Interactive, which is now owned by IAC, which also owns Newsweek. It just seems like a lot of connections. Are these valid connections or just simple coincidences?
Well, I think, again, you have to look at the characters and narratives associated with pedophile networks and realize that these pedophile networks need handlers. That is to say, you've got to set it up, you've got to run it as a business. In Vancouver, for me, I believe it was run by Christopher Charles Ingveldsson around the 1998, 99, 2000 period. And that should really worry Canadians, because this guy has been in jail for directing an international pedophile ring, and he was the roommate of Justin Trudeau, presently the Prime Minister of Canada. So now the problem from Trudeau's point of view is he, for me, was very obviously a target for entrapment and potential blackmail. The question is, do you fall into it? Now, if people can be accused of engaging in downloading pedophile images, their credit cards having been stolen, then I imagine that Justin Trudeau is very vulnerable to being accused of being involved in an international pedophile ring. He may not be, but you lie down with dogs, you wake up with fleas. I mean, Christopher Charles Ingveldsson, right, is in jail or has been in jail for directing an international pedophile ring. How many other people in the prison-based network that was developed after the three strikes laws were passed in the United States by Bill Clinton and implemented in California by Kamala Harris, how many other prisoners are sitting in jail trying to clear their names or their reputations, or people who are threatened with that? And ultimately, you can actually, in my opinion, you can deploy an international online criminal insurgency through a prison system with the three strikes laws. Over to you.
I'm trying to find if there's anything in here about Christopher Charles Ingvaldsson. There's no news about this guy. Kind of interesting that he is involved in all this stuff and so close to Trudeau, but there's no news about him at all. Same thing with Cameron Ortis. It's just strange to me how long it takes for anything to happen with any of these guys. Well, 1 week ago, let's see what they're saying here about Cameron Ortis. RCMP used covert search and surveillance powers before arresting a high-level intelligence official. That's interesting, isn't it?
Well, let's just understand what Cameron Ortis had got to. He's the first civilian intelligence director of the RCMP with access to the top secret information for the Five Eyes operation, right? And basically compromising them, if what we believe is true. He hasn't come to trial yet. But let me give you another alternative. What happens if he was a good guy and he'd infiltrated the RCMP looking for these compromised nodes, found them, and the RCMP and Trudeau, who I believe is potentially a blackmail target because of his association with Christopher Charles Ingvaldsson, hey, we better shut this guy down, so let's arrest him, right? He hasn't come to trial.
But why does he have all those computers at his house?
And he has 30 computers, but maybe he's an ultra smart guy and he's uncovered this compromised node network operated by SERCO. And SERCO said, we got to shut him down.
It would make sense, and it would be consistent with their MO to frame him as a criminal. But see, it's interesting, David, because Ortis is closely associated with the FBI bust of Phantom Secure, who were, according to the FBI, they were hacking BlackBerries. And it's just interesting because that is the exact same story of, that's what George Webb was talking about when I first encountered him. And it seems that he is constantly putting out misinformation and constantly associating himself with stories that he's trying to disrupt rather than actually solve. So I've been asking the question of, was George Webb or this network of social engineers that seem to be associated with him, were they working to protect Phantom Secure? He certainly never said anything about it that I've heard.
Well, now David Swigart describes himself as an ethical hacker, right?
Yeah.
Now, the PhD thesis of Cameron Ortis talks about a nexus between transnational crime groups, right, and system intruders. Well, I don't think there's a big difference between an ethical hacker and a systems intruder. He's gone into a system where he shouldn't go, ostensibly to protect the system against a hack. But as I've always said, it may be just a function that the guy's incompetent. If you leave the door open into these systems, you get to be able to, for example, as SERCO, I believe, did, to hack the communication systems to aircraft that you plan to hijack electronically on 911 and fly them to targets in Washington and the United States, in New York. Basically, you trick a group of shareholders, which include California, into a tender meeting on the 47th floor, which looks to me like a junket room operation. Now, may I talk about junket rooms, or is that something you...
No, you can, but it's, I think we want to stay on Willie Brown and Condoleezza Rice and all that, but what is it
Cameron
that you feel about the junket rooms?
Well, it's very important because this comes back to SERCO, right? The chairman of SERCO, Roy Gardner, is a director of William Hill, the world's largest sportsbook operator, with 70% of the business in Nevada. And this sportsbook operation lends itself to what are known as junket room operators, where a big casino like MGM Mandalay Bay Hotel or the equivalent in Macau in the old Portuguese colony, they bring in a junket room operators who brings with them what are known as whales or high rollers. Some of them have $10 million to blow in a night. I happen to know or have met Kerry Packer, who was considered in Nevada to be the greatest gambler they ever had. And he could lose or gain $10, $20 million in a night's gambling. He has a 747 waiting at the airport. The problem that you have with the junket room operations, they're extremely effective for laundering money, because you can bring in dirty money to the casino, which is what happened at the River Rock Casino in Richmond, BC, which I believe is the hub of these corrupt organizations. You can bring it in like a bag of a sports bag full of $500,000. You trade it for chips inside the casino. You lose, and the money actually goes to the house or the junket room operator, and you can bet on anything, including the number of dead firefighters on 911, or the time between one building coming down and the other building coming down. Right?
There's another thing, David, because there's at least two social engineers that I'm aware of who are professional poker players. And any of these type of gambling things, you could, it's conceivable, if someone's sitting at a table, I mean, that is a way of sending money to them, whether it's poker or something else. If you can control the outcome of the game, you can control who gets paid and who loses. And this could be one way. See, there's one thing, there's laundering money, which obviously somebody earns money illegally and they want to pass it through a business to give some sort of legitimate representation of where it came from so they can deposit it in the bank and use it to buy a house or a car or something like that. But there's also the laundering of payments. If you want to send money to someone to do something illegal, it makes sense that you would not want that payment to be traceable back to you. So if person A wanted to pay person B in a secretive way, couldn't person A get involved either directly or through a third party in some sort of gambling event where person A loses the money and person B wins the money, and according to the public and the IRS and all official records, it's just a lucky victory?
And that's absolutely back to SERCO and the template of patented devices, which I've got up on my reverse CSI website, including the injection of content into social networks, right, to enhance the pleasure and participation of the various players. And as part of that patent, it talks about placing bets, tips, and rewarding people with applause. And these social engineers appear to get their kicks in some cases by applause, getting Able Danger shut down, et cetera, et cetera. And so we need to be very aware of how you can switch from real to fake narratives and real to fake characters. And to do that successfully, we've been doing it, well, the British have been doing it since World War II, you need to have very accurate timing signals. So when the National Physical Laboratory in the UK was outsourced to SERCO, and then I'm going to come to what's even more egregious in the United States under the Clinton administration, is SERCO now has access to the most accurate clock in the world. I think it neither loses nor gains more than a second in 186 billion years. Well, that's going to see you and me out. But that prevents people debating about, the time of an event. Like the plane that hit the north face of the North Tower hit at 8:46:46. If you're betting on when that takes place, you need to know the most accurate to the second, because you don't want someone else saying, hey, I said 8:46:47. So you need an absolute rigorous time. So a symptom of the compromised node network is that SERCO, they got the contract to operate the National Physical Laboratory. And now I'm going to come to something that's highly relevant to the United States election, because under Bill Clinton, right, he outsourced, or his administration outsourced, the operation of the United States National Visa Center to SERCO, which proceeded to produce the visas needed by the muscle hijackers through Dubai in the United Arab Emirates to come into the United States and act as patsies for the 911 attack. So SERCO is at the heart of the attack on the United States on 911. It's at the heart of the operation of these compromised node networks through pedophile tracking. And it's the heart of the ability to put together a very accurate time that you need to drive the junket room operations of international, transnational crime groups around the world. Over to you.
Yeah, we've spoken quite a lot about how SERCO injects fake news, borrows networks. I mean, I think that that was all, based on doing it for mainstream news. But what we've now seen in our own experience over the past 4 years is that these same exact techniques are being applied here, social engineering in the news, social engineering in social media. And I think, David, social media is to some extent gaining parity with mainstream news in terms of the number of people that get their information from it, or potentially how far a story could go that originates in social media. That's basically well known because there have been several times that it's happened, the Monica Lewinsky story, other stories. So it seems that there's as much of a clamp on social media and the types of stuff that you and I talk about to basically, create these realistic scenarios that follow a timeline and have things that happen in real time. And they use plans and procedures. They inject fake news. And the compromised node, I want to make clear, and correct me if I'm wrong, David, you're talking about basically getting someone in a position where they're compromised. They have to do something even if they don't want to. So there's this idea of putting someone in prison and having the prisoner's dilemma. You can hire someone to do something only if they want to. To force somebody to do something, to compel them to do something, it opens up a whole other range of possibilities because, you and I have been talking about how could it be possible that these social engineers would persist for so long. I mean, if you were at a job, David, for 3 or 4 years that was just an obvious waste of time and getting nowhere, it doesn't seem like you'd persist. You'd lose interest in it. The employer might lose interest in paying you. But it seems like the people that are after us and the people that are after Donald Trump and the people that want to fill the news with nonsense, they seem to be just remarkably driven, almost as if compelled.
They have a handler, right? Because these are synchronized and coordinated attacks. They come at you from different directions. Their success is if you get distracted or diverted and put a significant amount of your time, and you put hundreds of hours into protecting yourself against these people, that for them is a success, because every hour you put into defending yourself against them is an hour less working with people like me to expose to the public at large just how powerful this network is. And let me just run from Americans, and I know we're getting out of time, but I believe this election, the outcome of the election will be based on fraud, right? Perhaps on both sides, but predominantly the people who will move into a power as a result of that fraud, I believe, are experts in the creation, manipulation, and operation of compromised node networks. And two of those people, I believe, include Kamala Harris, in her career as a prosecutor and operating the children and families business in San Francisco, and in Washington. Obviously, we can talk about Christine Marcy, but in New York, we need to talk about Ghislaine Maxwell, right? That's a British trained agent, Oxford graduate, Oxford alumna, right? She arrives in 1990 in New York with a sinecure. That's a sort of annual or monthly payment from her father's estate, he was found floating off the back of the Lady Ghislaine yacht, but he'd stolen $400 million from the Daily Mirror, a pension fund. So he's a crook, right? Now, so she arrives in New York and apparently sets up as a career as a pimp for Jeffrey Epstein, finding young girls to service and compromise, I would argue, the elite of New York, if that's the right term. So, for example, Bill Clinton makes 26 trips to the Little St. John's Island, where he gets a supply of underage girls or whatever.
Well, so David, technically he's compromised as well, because they have all this video of him, with underage girls, so they can make him do whatever they want. This is strange news from just 2 days ago. 2 victims have dropped their cases against the estate and Maxwell. Why would they do that?
Well, because the crown jewels of the compromised node network are not the agents, like potentially the people who keep hacking away at you and your reputation, or me and my reputation. It's their handlers. So I believe you get to be a handler by going through the process of being an agent. You get familiar with, is it what they call it, the tradecraft in the spy business.
Yeah.
But then you get to be in a position where you recognize the frailties of men and women. You know, they talk about sex, fear, greed, and power. And ultimately, you develop a business, which I believe was Starnet Communications, to entrap hundreds, if not thousands of people who can potentially be told, listen and obey at some future date, to do exactly what they need to be doing. For example, to kill the crime scene investigation of 911. I'm sick and tired of seeing that word. It is a tragedy, absolutely. But all of those crime scenes outside the Pentagon, right? The crash in the field outside Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and the demolition of towers 1, 2, and 7, the bomb inside the Treasury building, they are crime scenes, Jason. But in each case, a compromised group of law enforcement people or first responders goes in and takes the evidence away, right? So the steel from the trade center was shipped off to smelters in India and China, and it came back, and I believe they used the steel to make a frigate for the United States Navy. So you at the moment you've got Huawei at a trial or an impending trial for RICO charges for theft of intellectual property. I'm suggesting that SERCO provided Huawei with access to the intellectual property stolen from Nortel. And actually, I believe SERCO should be considered as a co-defendant with Huawei in their court in Brooklyn. And that would be the greatest protection you could have for the Republic in the United States. Because let me just reel off a list of the agencies that SERCO has taken over in the United States. As I said, the National Visa Center in 1994. So SERCO provided visas to the muscle hijackers that participated or were seen to participate in the attack. SERCO runs the United States Patent and Trademark Office and processed the 4 millionth patent on the 17th of November of last year. And now one of those patents, remember, was displayed Raytheon. I don't know if you can
well, we don't have time for that, David, because we're almost out of time. And what I do want to do is come back to this Willie Brown warning, because we've just, John in the chat has sent me a link to this article. And for people who think that what we're talking about is, nonsense from 4chan or conspiracy theories or whatever, this is NBC News, as trusted by dopes as any other source. And they're saying 9/11 widows react to Condoleezza Rice's testimony. And here, Lori Van Auken, widow of the 9/11 attack, said, "We also know that people stopped flying domestically. Ashcroft stopped flying. Pentagon officials stopped flying the day before September 11th. They were warned not to fly on September 11th. She says, "We think San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown was told not to fly. That's all domestic." Everybody keeps telling us how they were focused outward. People can go through this article. It's on NBC News. Let's see if it talks about Willie Brown or Condoleezza Rice elsewhere. I don't know that that's confirmation that he did receive it, but it's rumored that Willie Brown had received that low-key warning. There's something that I wanted to bring to your attention. I don't know if you saw this, and we'll take this out, and then people can join us for the follow-up sponsor-exclusive show on subscribestar.com/reversecsi, patreon.com/reversecsi storyboards, and subscribestar.com and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. I know you read this article, David, but did you know that our friend Terrence Hallinan, yes, let's find him in here. Okay. So before the mayor was even out the door, so this is talking about Willie Brown, whatever the case, this is talking about Willie Brown getting this low-key warning. The mayor himself said it came from his security people at the airport. Mike McCarran, Assistant Deputy Director at SFO, which is the San Francisco International Airport, said the Federal Aviation Administration routinely issues security notices about possible threats. He said 2 or 3 such notices had been received in the past couple months, but none in recent days. Whatever the case, Brown didn't think about it again until he was up, dressed, and waiting for his ride to the airport for the 8 a.m. flight to New York, where he was to attend this retirement meeting. But before he was even out the door, District Attorney Terrence Hallinan was checking in and offering help. And what followed was a conversation made up of equal parts gravity and formality. You know, you're the first call I've gotten on this, Brown said to Hallinan as you were signing off. So it's interesting that Hallinan is contacting him. I wonder if that's also potentially part of the warning, David. These warnings are sometimes quite indirect, but I'm sorry to leave you hanging. We're going to have to transition now to our sponsor exclusive show, and people will hopefully join us there, David, where we can answer this question of what you think about then San Francisco District Attorney Terrence Hallinan being the first guy to speak to Willie Brown about 9/11. Just like with Bill Ayers, it's at least suggestive that he was right on top of this thing. I'll see you in a few minutes over there, David.
Thank you, Jason.